Our next witness wishes to be known as Carol, does she?
That's correct, sir.
Carol, please.
Please state your full name
Carol Ann Carruthers.
and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Carol, you're here to talk about your late husband, Ollie,
Yeah.
and you've provided us with a photograph of him that you'd like to be displayed throughout your evidence.
Yes.
You met Ollie in 2003
Yes.
and you married in 2011.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit of what Ollie was like?
Ollie was a very kind man. He had a fantastic sense of humour, loved his family, loved life, and he loved travel. Up until the point of his infection, he worked as a service engineer, travelling all over the world. He loved to travel, and when we met, we carried on, we travelled. He never let his infection get him down. He was a founder member of the Contaminated Blood group, CBC, that are here today. And although he was doing all that, he kind of kept it a little bit away from our life together. He didn't want to be Mr. Hepatitis C. He wanted to be my husband, my Ollie. That was him, really.
Ollie had haemophilia B,
Yeah.
and when he was tested in 1974, his levels were categorised as mild.
Yeah.
In 1977, they were seemingly severe, but in reality, you've said he rarely had bleeds and required very little treatment.
That's true, yes.
Ollie was treated at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle and had dental extractions in 1977 and 1979
Yeah.
when he was given factor IX prophylactically.
Yeah.
He then lived in America for a few years in the 1980s,
Yes.
and while he was there in 1982, he had to have a tooth extracted.
Yes.
What was Ollie told by the US dentist about having blood products prophylactically?
When he was in America, he was told that the blood products were very risky. There were risks of infection. And they wanted to remove the tooth, but to have factor on standby in case he bled. So their attitude there was, we'll wait and see what happens. If you bleed, we'll treat you. The risk was seemed greater to give prophylactic treatment than to give treatment in the event of a bleed.
And on that occasion, his tooth was extracted, and did he need any factor products?
No, he didn't bleed.
In 1989, Ollie was back in the UK and needed another tooth extraction,
Yes.
and he met with Dr. Jones to discuss it.
Yes.
Ollie, what did Ollie tell Dr. Jones, as far as you understand?
As far as I understand it, originally he went to the dental hospital, who then referred him back to Dr. Jones in the haemophilia centre. Dr. Jones basically said they wanted to do prophylactic treatment, and Ollie stated that he did not want prophylactic treatment. He'd been told it was risky. He explained to them in America that they had removed the tooth, he hadn't bled, and that they had it on standby in case there was a problem. Dr. Jones at the time appeared to accept everything that he was saying. And Ollie's sort of understanding was they were going to look into things. So he was a little bit surprised when he turned up, and they treated him anyway.
Ollie gave evidence to the Archer inquiry, and we have the transcript of his evidence, and
Yes.
he says exactly the same, that he told Dr. Jones about what he'd been told in the US,
Yes.
and that on that occasion he hadn't needed factor products.
Yes.
We also have a note of that consultation. If we could look at 1850005, please, Henry. We can see in the middle of the page that the date is the 15th of March 1989. 10 years since last visit, no problems. Tooth extraction in USA in 1983 without treatment, no bleeding. Needs upper left premolar query extracted, would not want factor treatment if possible. So we have that in the records. And as you've said, Ollie's understanding was that he would have the extraction and have factor on standby.
Yeah.
Ollie's factor 9 levels were also tested at that appointment.
Yes.
What were they?
I believe they were at 9, which is considered mild.
On the 16th of May 1989, he went to the RVI for the extraction. What did Ollie say happened at that extraction?
He said they just got on and gave him treatment. Nothing was said to him at all.
And he said in his own evidence before that he trusted that the doctors wouldn't knowingly put him at risk
Yes.
and accepted the treatment.
Yeah, I mean, the doctors were gods then. You just did what they said. You wouldn't stand up to a doctor and say no, whereas nowadays I think the culture's a little bit different.
He was given BPL factor 9.
Yeah.
As far as you understand, was anything discussed then about the risk of infection? Ollie having raised it, was anything really discussed?
No, I don't think it was. He's certainly never mentioned it.
We've had a response from Dr. Jones this morning, and I'm just going to read some of that response. He says this: I would have spoken to Mr. Carruthers prior to his dental extractions, noting that his factor 9 level was below that needed to secure haemostasis during and after surgery. I would have explained the need to cover the procedure using a factor 9 concentrate. I would also have covered, as a routine with all patients, the risks of bloodborne infection. This risk was already known by Mr. Carruthers. This routine continued to be followed beyond the introduction of heat-treated concentrates from December 1984 onwards, despite the probability that such heating largely eliminated the risk of viral transmission. Mr. Carruthers would have had to give his informed consent both for the extractions and the haemostatic cover provided. At no time would I have suggested that we adopt a wait-and-see policy to only give factor 9 in the event of excessive bleeding. Such a policy could be extremely dangerous, both because of overt hemorrhage and because of soft tissue bleeding leading to airways obstruction. Ollie had also felt that the reason he was given factor 9 at that stage was because of convenience and cost.
Definitely.
And Dr. Jones has responded to that. I strongly deny the suggestion that the NHS costing had anything to do with the management of this case, or that it was convenient to give Mr. Carruthers factor 9. It was essential to secure haemostasis during and after the dental extractions. And I think you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, really just to say that obviously Ollie's blood factor levels had been quite high prior to the treatment. His medical history was such that he presented as very mild, and his experience in America, having had a tooth extracted in the same circumstances, and he had not bled. It doesn't feel like it was essential treatment to me or to Ollie. He certainly did not feel that treatment was necessary.
I should say that the full statement from Dr. Jones will go on the website in due course. 3 to 4 months later, Ollie was working in Iraq and became unwell.
Yeah.
What was wrong?
He had headaches, he felt nauseous, he was just generally feeling tired all the time and under the weather, so to speak.
He returned to the UK and saw Dr. Jones. What did he ask Ollie?
He asked him if he'd been messing around in Iraq, implying he'd been messing around with other women in a Muslim country, which would have just been plain stupid.
Ollie took exception to that
He did.
suggestion very strongly.
Yes.
Dr. Jones's response says that he had to ask questions around sexual history in order to obtain a full history and to allow diagnosis. In the October, Ollie was tested and diagnosed with hepatitis C.
Yes.
That was October 1989. If we look at 1850009, please. We can see the date in the top right corner, and that at this early stage in 89 there is a request on the right hand side, hepatitis A, B, C status please, and then on the left, hepatitis C antibodies detected. And so we can see it's hepatitis C rather than non-A, non-B on this date. Ollie was told he was the first person in the north of England, possibly the UK, to be diagnosed with hepatitis C as opposed to non-A, non-B.
Yes, that's what he told me.
And Ollie was sure that he contracted the hepatitis C from the 1989 batch.
Yes.
Why was that?
Ollie had not received treatment for over 10 years. He had been perfectly well in all that time. He'd been travelling the world with his job, just carrying on life. He received that treatment, and 6 months after that treatment, he started to get symptoms of what at the time he clearly didn't know what the symptoms were, but Ollie was into research. Once he found out what had happened, he was reading everything he could. And his understanding of the disease was that not everybody gets symptoms at all, but if you're going to get them, you usually get them within 6 months. So he believed that that was the one that had infected him.
And when he obtained his medical records, he also saw that his ALT levels were raised.
Well, in all fairness, we're not medical experts. We didn't understand what ALT levels were. It was only when it was pointed out to me, looking at his medical records, what had happened to his ALT records, that there was a correlation there. He would never have known that.
Ollie wrote to BPL and in the 2000s and about having been infected in 1989, and they responded that they were never informed of any products being contaminated in 1989. And he also wrote to the RVI in Newcastle in 2008, and we have a copy of their response. 1850010, please. It's a letter from October 2008. It's page 3, please. The next page. So we can see the date there, 17th of October 2008. And it's written by a haematologist who wasn't Ollie's treating doctor. But we can see at the bottom of that first paragraph what they said. They say viral inactivation of plasma-derived products was introduced in 1985. BPL have not issued any alerts about contamination of any batches subsequent to this date, and there was no evidence that there was any problem with the batch you received in 1989. However, you clearly did receive plasma-derived treatment in 1977 and 1979, and it's likely that these were responsible for exposing you to hepatitis C virus. Ollie didn't accept that.
No, he didn't.
Because of the reasons we've talked about.
Yes.
As Ollie got older, his factor levels went up.
Yes.
And he was used as part of a journal paper, though you're unsure if it was ever published.
Yes.
But the reason you've highlighted this was the terms of the letter that he received, or you're not even sure if he received the letter.
I don't even think he received it. No.
But you found it in the records and you wanted us to see it. 1850013. It's a letter from Dr. Jones saying that his colleague had identified the cause of your haemophilia B and wishes to report this in the medical literature, anonymously, of course. And then Dr. Green has now written back to me expressing interest in your early history, but I've no records of your childhood. I'd therefore be very grateful if you could drop me a note telling me about any bleeding episodes that you can remember, or anything else you think might be helpful to judge the clinical severity of your haemophilia B in your early years. Naturally, all this will be kept confidential. And the reason you wanted us to highlight this letter is that Ollie was simply told about the paper. He wasn't asked to consent to be part of the study.
Yes.
And as far as you're concerned, he was never asked to give his consent
No,
for any form of
I
study.
don't think he knew anything about it, and I'm not even convinced that he ever received this letter.
But even if he had received the letter, it was simply informing him that he was going to be part of
Yes.
it, rather than asking him whether he was willing to be.
Yes.
Ollie had some other concerns that he may have been used for the purposes of research. Why was that?
Because he didn't bleed, he's obviously everybody knows that they were starting to heat treat the blood, but they didn't really know if it was working. Given that it was highly unlikely he'd got any infections because he hadn't been treated for 10 years, and he'd done a lot of research amongst the haemophilia community where they'd been looking at records and they'd got things written on their notes that implied that they were not infected, so they could be used. He always wondered if maybe they'd done the same thing to him, but there was nothing in his notes that indicated that that had been the case.
He had a specific concern about a liver biopsy.
Yes. He was asked to give a liver biopsy. Now, bearing in mind they can't extract a tooth without factor cover, a liver biopsy in somebody with bleeding problems is not something you do as a matter of course. He was asked whether he had definitely got hepatitis C, to which they said yes, and he said, so what's the liver biopsy going to tell me? At which point I think they realised he was not going to comply with what they wanted.
And he declined to have that liver
Yes,
biopsy
he did.
the year after his diagnosis. But he was always concerned about why they were asking him.
Yes.
But it's fair to say there was nothing in his records that gave any indication
No,
of research.
that was just his feeling.
Ollie described to you, and in his evidence to Archer, that he was told very little about hepatitis C when it was diagnosed.
Yes.
What do you recall of his understanding at diagnosis?
He was told basically he had it, and that was more or less it. He left the room stunned, not knowing what it was. He got on the internet, as people do, and started doing his own research. He found the action groups, and it wasn't really until he started talking to them that he actually found out what he'd got.
He also reported pains in his liver
He
quite early on. And what was he told about those?
It proves you're human.
And it proves that you're mortal.
Yes.
He was also told that the hepatitis C itself would be short-lived.
Yes. There's actually another comment in his notes which actually says he appears to be getting over it. And given that you don't actually get over it, it's an odd comment for a medical expert to write.
We've got that document 1850012. It's a letter to his GP. And it's the last couple of sentences. Apparently he had an episode of possible hepatitis C subsequent to his teeth being taken out and given factor concentrate last year. I'm pleased that he's got over this.
And this is from the same department, is it, which had the first test in the northeast in the previous October showing that he had it?
It appears to be so, yes.
So possible hepatitis C is not faithful to the records.
No.
Thank you.
After his diagnosis, and sometime later as he became aware of what hepatitis C really was, Ollie realised that since the diagnosis in 1990, he'd underplayed some symptoms that he'd had over the years. What were those symptoms? Sorry.
I can't remember.
I'm so sorry. You talk in your statement that after a few years, Ollie became very aware of the impact of hepatitis C on him.
Yes.
And he was suffering particularly from brain fog.
Brain fog, yes.
Can you tell us how that impacted him?
He couldn't think clearly. His thoughts would get confused and muddled. He had been working as a service engineer, as I said, all over the world. He needed to be on his game, so to speak. And the brain fog started to affect his ability to do his job. It really is just that ability to think logically, to think through problems, to be able to solve problems.
He also started to react to the chemicals that were used in the factories in which he was working.
Yes.
What was his understanding of what was happening?
I think it's obviously when you, not knowing that much about it, he was obviously inhaling toxins into his body, and the liver is responsible for dealing with those things. I think it was struggling to get rid of those toxins in his body, and he was beginning to feel very unwell. A lot of the symptoms were non-specific, just I don't feel right.
He started taking lower level jobs, less responsibility, and travelling less.
Well, he had to give up the travelling completely.
Ollie also felt that his hepatitis C had affected his first marriage and his relationship with his children.
He did.
What were his particular concerns?
He felt that because of the way his brain and that wasn't operating, that his tolerance level was reduced. So he started, I guess they were arguing more. I mean, we didn't talk too much about what happened in his first marriage. But yeah, his marriage broke down, and he felt that his state of mind was, well, it certainly didn't help it.
And that's how he described it as well, that
Yes.
he couldn't put all the blame on it, but that it certainly hadn't helped.
Yes.
And including his relationship with his children.
Yeah. I mean, he always had a good relationship with his children. He still had access, he still saw them. Even when he moved down south to be with me, we would still go back up north on a regular basis to visit.
Ollie wanted to have treatment for the hepatitis C, and this again is before you met.
Yes.
And he asked for it at the haemophilia centre. What was their response?
I believe that funding was an issue, and that there was no funding available, because again, Ollie had done all the research. He found out quite early on that there was a treatment available, so he naturally wanted that treatment. He was refused treatment, and then he was reading a paper and he saw about a prisoner who was complaining about the treatment he was being given, and he was really, really angry about this, and he went to the press to try and say, look, here I am, I've been infected by blood transfusions in effect, I can't get treatment, and there's a prisoner here, no idea how he's been infected, but he's being offered treatment. This isn't right.
He then did start treatment in 2001, but that didn't clear the virus.
No.
He then started pegylated interferon and ribavirin in 2003,
Yes.
but had to stop quite quickly.
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, he was told that the pegylated interferon would not have the side effects that the normal interferon had had. he told me on the second course of treatment, which was also up in Newcastle, I think after the first treatment he was violently ill and just thought, I'm not going through that again. Because on his first course of treatment, they started off treating him for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, he hadn't cleared the virus. I don't think they understood that much about the treatment at the time, and they suggested another 6 months, so he did a full year of treatment the first time, and still did not clear the virus. So when he was so ill after the first dose on this second course of treatment, he just said no.
His care then transferred to Basingstoke when he moved
Yes.
to live with you.
Yes.
And he was given pegylated interferon in 2005.
Yes.
What happened when he had that treatment?
He was okay for a while. I mean, understanding that Ollie was a very private person, and when he wasn't feeling well, he was never one to complain. So a lot of the time, I never really understood how bad he was feeling. We had a holiday booked, and we went on holiday. He wasn't very well, and he was struggling with his breathing whilst he was on it. And he had an appointment when he got back, and we went to see the gastroenterologist in Basingstoke. She was very, very good. And she immediately decided to stop. She listened to his lungs and she could hear crackling in his lungs. Immediately decided to stop treatment, did all sorts of scans, and came back saying he had drug-induced pulmonary fibrosis. So she was saying that the interferon had caused a problem in his lungs.
And what was Ollie's health like after he stopped the treatment?
Ollie was okay for a while. I think that although the short time he was on that treatment, it had reduced his viral load by a certain amount. So he felt okay for a little while. We always had lots of doctor's appointments and scans and God knows what else, with checking everything. But generally, for a while, he was in good health.
You've said in your statement he needed to nap at times because he still had
Yeah,
quite
he
a
would
bit of
still
fatigue.
get tired. Yeah, he would get tired, but I suppose I just took that as that was life with Ollie, really. That was just part of it.
In 2007, Ollie was diagnosed with bowel cancer.
Yes.
You're unsure whether that was connected to the hepatitis.
Yes, it's an odd thing. A lot of Ollie's research was saying that the hepatitis C virus can affect more than just the liver. I mean, we've already talked about brain fog. And I know talking again with other people in the haemophilia community, we found a number of people who've had cancers in other parts of their body. We don't know if it's linked. And I think that's one of the things we're finding out, is that the medical professionals really don't know that much about this virus. They're still finding out things.
He had an operation
Yes.
and was ultimately given the all clear from the bowel cancer.
Yes.
But he still had difficulties with the pulmonary fibrosis
Yes.
and was having very regular scans of his lungs.
Yes. Yeah.
Then in July 2012, you went on a cruise together.
Yes, we did.
Can you tell us what happened when you returned?
Well, it sort of started while we were on holiday. There was a cold going round, and I caught the cold, as you do. So Ollie started coughing, and we naturally just thought he'd caught my cold. However, it never really developed into anything. And when we came home, I said, "Do you know, you've had that cough quite a while now. I think maybe you should go and see the doctor." So he went to the doctor, and as with all these things, the doctor gave him a course of antibiotics. A week later, he'd taken the tablets, no change at all. He was still coughing, so he went back. They gave him a course of steroid tablets. Again, a week later, no improvement, so he went back to see the doctor. The doctor then decided to refer him back to the hospital, back to the lung people that he'd already seen.
Respiratory team.
The respiratory people, yes. the people he'd already seen anyway because of the pulmonary fibrosis. So he had an appointment and he went over there, he saw them, and they decided to have a look inside. So they did a bronchoscopy, and I think that was on the Monday. By the end of that week, he started to feel very, very unwell. So I think it was a Thursday he went to see his GP, and the GP listened to his lungs and said, "I think you've got fluid around your lungs." He said, we'll need to refer that to the hospital. He said, "Come back in the morning, and if there's no improvement, I'll send you over to the hospital." So we went back the following morning. I went with him, and he sent him over to the hospital. When we got there, we did see the respiratory specialist who'd done the bronchoscopy. He said, "I haven't got the results back yet." He said, "But I know what I saw." So without any confirmation, he told us that Ollie did have lung cancer. He had fluid around his lungs and they needed to draw the fluid off. So he stayed in hospital on that Friday night. They gave him factor cover and drew off the fluid from his lungs, and they discharged him on the Saturday morning. I got him home. I don't know how we got up the stairs that night because he was still struggling with his breathing. And on the Sunday, he came downstairs and he literally just sat on the sofa. And he said, "You're going to have to take me back to the hospital, I can't breathe." So I took him back. This time we didn't have the referral from the GP, so we had to go through A&E and all that. They admitted him back into hospital. They attempted to treat him and to stabilise him. I think it was on the Sunday when I phoned Rob and his daughters and I said, "Look, he's really not very well at all. I don't know what's going on. I'm worried." Rob came down on the Monday and his daughters just made it on the Tuesday that his results were finally due in, and he actually died on that day. So it was all very, very fast in the end.
He died on the 28th of August 2012,
Yes.
aged 63.
Yes.
You've said you miss him terribly.
I do. We lived it. We did everything together. We travelled. We had a caravan. We had a really happy life. We just liked getting away and doing things. And I realised it was the first time I'd ever been on my own. And it was hard. It was very hard.
Your understanding was that the hepatitis C could cause pulmonary fibrosis, or that the interferon can induce it.
Yes.
So you asked for hepatitis C to be put on Ollie's death certificate.
Yes, I did.
You also wanted a post-mortem to be carried out.
I did. Ollie, as I said earlier, Ollie was convinced that the hepatitis C virus was causing damage to other parts of the body. And he was concerned that particularly all the support mechanisms were all geared up around liver cancer. He'd got pulmonary fibrosis. He was entitled to nothing. Well, he had his stage 1 payment, which was a one-off payment at the time during Ollie's lifetime. He was convinced that this virus affected more than just the liver. It was affecting his lungs. He looked on the Lung Foundation Trust, actually said that the hepatitis C virus can cause pulmonary fibrosis. And then he's going, so was it the interferon or was it the virus? We don't know, but obviously he'd got 2 risk factors in there, so both of which were linked.
And that was why you wanted the post-mortem?
Yes.
To try and understand a little bit more of what had happened?
Yes, Ollie would have wanted to have helped the rest of the community out there, because there are other people getting similar symptoms. And the one thing he would have wanted was to pass things on to other people.
What was the doctor's response to your request?
Initially, he was kind of okay with it and said he would organise it, but actually he didn't. So, I mean, it was a bank holiday weekend and things were left. And then they said there would actually be too much deterioration to find anything. Dr. Brooks, who was the gastroenterologist, did do some liver calls. And even in the results that came back, it did say that there was a certain amount of deterioration in those liver calls.
But you felt that the earlier doctor, the first doctor,
He failed to actually do what he said he'd do.
and you said in your statement that there was a suggestion that the reason you'd asked for the post-mortem was so that you'd be eligible for further Skipton Fund
No, it
payments.
wasn't. It was more about, would this information be useful to other people who were going through things now?
But you've said in your statement that you felt that that was the suggestion from the doctors.
It was, yes.
That the reason you wanted it was for money, when actually you were saying it was about the information.
Yes.
In fact, if we look at the financial assistance, when Ollie had applied to the Caxton Foundation for some things when you were together, you'd been unhappy that Ollie had to provide them with your income.
Yes, he was very unhappy about that as well. He didn't... We were a couple, but as a man, he didn't want to be dependent upon my income. He'd always had good jobs and held down good jobs. Why should he now be dependent upon me when this wasn't his fault?
And you'd been very independent people with
Yes.
independent careers and independent
Yeah.
finances.
Yes.
Ollie also disliked applying to Caxton because he felt it was a begging bowl.
Absolutely, yes. I think anybody would agree with that.
As you've said, he received the Skipton Stage 1, felt that was really very little to receive.
Yes.
You received a funeral grant when Ollie died,
Yes.
and the winter fuel allowance was transferred to you.
Yes.
But other than that, you've not received or applied for anything from
did
Skipton
have-
or Caxton.
No,
Oh.
definitely nothing from... I did have the 10,000 that was announced fairly recently as a widow's pension, widow's grant or whatever it was, I can't remember.
But you haven't applied for anything else,
No.
and so that comment, the suggestion from the doctors that you were trying to have more financial assistance, particularly grated.
Yes, I'm not entitled to anything else because of my personal income. So I've had nothing for Ollie, really.
One of Ollie's particular concerns when he was campaigning was the system of grants and ex gratia payments.
Yes.
And I think you wanted to say a little bit more about his and your concerns about it.
Yeah, basically it's all about making ex gratia payments. If wrong has been done, then people should be properly compensated, not ex gratia payments. Ollie felt very strongly about that. Not this drip, 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 giving people bits and pieces of money. Give people what they deserve to compensate them. If it had been any other kind of medical accident, they'd be properly compensated.
Those are the questions I have for you. I'm just going to turn to Mr. Locke and Ms. Gibbs.
Okay.
They have no further questions they would like me to raise. Is there anything else you would like to say, Carol?
No,
Before we finish.
I think I'm fine.
There is one question which I'd like to
Yeah.
ask you, just for the record, really. You were married in 2011.
Yeah,
You plainly knew him for quite some time before that.
yes.
How long?
We met in 2003.
So it was 9 years before he died.
Yes, he moved down and moved in with me in 2004. So we were living together for a long period before we were actually married.
And did you know him at all before
No.
2003?
No.
It's let me turn to other matters then. It's not easy, is it, giving evidence there?
No, it's
You
not.
found it okay?
I'm okay. It's not easy. I have to do this for Ollie.
I wondered if that was the case.
Yes,
But,
I feel I have to do this for him.
because you've done him proud,
Thank you.
if I may say so.
Thank you.
And it's obviously, bits of it are very raw.
Yes.
But well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take lunch now, and we will come back at 1:25.
Thank you.
1:25.